Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sediko from Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute. It's a trust that was established for public benefit activities. One of the activities that we are doing, we are focusing on the social dialogues, picking up topics that will allow society to engage on. We have been running these sessions since 2020, and today is one of those sessions that we are running. Colleagues, you'll remember that in March 2004, there was an inaugural session of the Pan-African Parliament, which is also known as the African Parliament. It is the legislative body of the African Union, which was in Addis Ababa, but it was moved to Midrand, Johannesburg, South Africa. Some of the objectives of the Pan-African Parliament are to implement the policies and objectives of the African Union, cultivate the human rights and democracy in Africa, make sure the member states adhere to good governance, transparency, and accountability, allow the people of Africa to know that the objectives and policies of the African Union so that they might be able to integrate themselves continentally while working within the framework of the African Union, engender peace, security, and stability of the continent, promote self-reliance and economic recovery, promote cooperation and development in Africa, strengthen a sense of solidarity and build a common destiny among the peoples of Africa, create cooperation among regional economic communities and their member parliaments. So those are the objectives of the Pan-African Parliament. Some days ago or a week ago, the Pan-African Parliament was met by chaos. And if you can allow me for a minute to play a video before we can continue. Just allow me for a minute to play a particular video.
Yeah. No.
Right? It's very often.
Oh.
Colleagues, those were the happenings at the recent Pan-African Parliament sitting. Remember, colleagues, I said the objectives of the Pan-African Parliament is to implement the policies and objectives of the African Union, cultivate human rights, democracy in Africa, make sure member states adhere to good governance, transparency, and accountability. Let the people of Africa know that the objectives and the policies of the African Union are so that they might be able to integrate themselves continentally while working within the framework of the African Union, promote peace, security, and stability of the continent, promote self-reliance, economic recovery, so as to lead a more prosperous future for the people of Africa, promote cooperation and development of Africa, strengthen a sense of solidarity and build a common diversity among the people of Africa, create cooperation among regional communities and their member parliament. Those are the objectives of the Pan-African Parliament. Colleagues, we are fortunate tonight to have in our midst a professor who's currently a professor of law at the University of South Africa. His research primarily focuses on the institutional development of the African Union, in particular the process of enhancing African Union institutions with supranational powers. Other research interests include international politics, transnational policy analysis, new paradigm of interstate relations, critical approaches to international law and governance, and democratization in Africa. He has written widely on the issues of African integration, democracy, and the good governance and development in Africa. He also provides commentary in print and broadcast media on African affairs. His writings have been published in a number of academic journals as chapter in books and other online platforms. He's a South African National Research Foundation rated researcher. In 2014, he was recognized by the Young People International Affairs as one of the top 35 African under the age of 35 for his research on supranational integration in Africa. He has presented talks in universities such as Pretoria, Lisbon, Coimbra, and Cambridge. He currently serves as the editor-in-chief of the South African Public Law Journal. In addition, he's on the editorial advisory board of the African Journal of Democracy and Governance, the Nigerian Book of International Law, and the Caribbean Law Review. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Professor Babatunde Fagbayiyo. I think I spelled it correctly, Prof. And without a waste of time, I'll hand over to you, Prof, to lead us in our discussion on the Pan-African Parliament. Over to you, Prof.
Oh, thank you, Sediko, and thanks to the participants. My task here is quite, I think I've been given a latitude. I'm not sure how many minutes you would want me to talk for.
We will allow you to go as you wish. We'll let you know when I say.
Oh yeah, so that I don't bore people and about about these issues. So because of the latitude I've been given tonight, I think I'll try as much as possible to not bore participants, to kind of get into the point and to just paint a picture of what has been happening and to situate this, because one of the problems we've had over the years, or based on what we've been seeing on TV, the so-called soap opera of Parliament, which again is not unique to Pan-African Parliament. Many people I've not been able to situate this, or I've not tried to understand this within various contexts. And it's beyond people just fighting in Midrand, right? It has to do with a whole lot of things. So the whole idea of a Pan-African Parliament, again, should be understood in the context of creating a platform for the peoples of this continent to be able to deliberate on issues at the continental level. And it's not new. If you read the writings of Kwame Nkrumah, those issues have actually been featured in some of his writings, and some of the things he spoke about regarding the creation of the Pan-African Parliament, a people's parliament, so to speak, where there will be representatives from across the continent. And of course, this parliament eventually was created in 2004, around the time the AU was transformed, or the OAU was transformed into the African Union. And the idea was to give it that kind of, to give it powers to be able to at least make laws. But as it is, and the problem is, the problem is that African leaders do not trust it enough to give it powers. To make laws. And you would ask yourself, what is the relevance of a parliament that cannot make laws? I mean, for those of us who studied politics and the law, I think one of the things we're exposed to in classrooms would be the separation of powers. The idea that the judiciary interprets, the executive implements, and the legislature makes the law. But this is not the case for the Pan-African Parliament. And again, members of the Pan-African Parliament are not elected they are not directly elected. So they are people who are already parliamentarians, and just, and each country would have to nominate 5 people or 5 parliamentarians to Midrand. And of course, it's not a permanent position. They only come to Midrand when they're sitting to deliberate on issues. So they don't have powers. And many people did not pay, outside of those who study the African Union and its politics, many did not pay any attention to the Pan-African Parliament until about 2-3 years ago, when there were issues of corruption or allegations of corruption and maladministration on the part of the outgoing Speaker of the Parliament, the Cameroonian representative, and of course the South African press and other agencies were the first to reveal some of the issues in the Pan-African Parliament. And people had to say, okay, wow, this is an organization that does not make laws, and we don't even know why it is there. But why are we spending so much on it? Why are we, not getting, your return on investment, so to speak? And of course, fast forward to 2 weeks ago, where there were fights over who would take over, and and things like that. But now there have been so many disturbing views of the fight that broke out about 2 weeks ago. First thing first, we're dealing with issues of procedure, right? The procedure is this: that whoever becomes the speaker, the president of the parliament, would be elected by a simple majority in the House. So there was never an issue of rotation. The issue of rotation is an issue that is still in the Malabo Protocol, a protocol that has yet to become law. So that is that, one. Number two, the issue of rotation is part of African Union politics. And as I said in a previous interview, I said, if, for example, we are taking this to court, and the only court we would have taken it to is not in existence, the African Court of Justice. If we take it to court and we want the court to interpret it, the court might have interpreted it contextually. So the court would say, this is African Union politics. This is how it operates. Let's look at these things in a much broader perspective. But as things stand, that is not the principle. That is not how people are elected. Is that a right thing to not have rotational, elections? of course, maybe from a moral perspective, and even from the idea of just, having regional representation in Pan-African Parliament, we would say, yeah, maybe. But from a legal perspective, the other side, to a very large degree, is saying this is the procedure, right? For whatever reasons, politicians will always be politicians, right? So that is that. Number two, the other debate about should we have it and should we close this parliament? It's a waste of money. I think it's also a very narrow way of looking at things. We cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's problematic, yes. Are there ways in which we could, salvage these issues? Of course, there are ways in which we could salvage these issues. Perhaps maybe this is what we should be looking at. And someone had asked me recently, saying, "Oh, so is Pan-Africanism dead?" So meaning, just because people are fighting immigrant, you can't jump to the conclusion that Pan-Africanism is dead. We have issues, there are processes, there are ways in which we could salvage things. We always have conflicts, we always have contestations. Politicians will play politics. That's what they play, right? And issues of rotational, issues of sharing positions and all of those things will always be on the table, be it in the national parliament or in the regional parliament, or of course, even in sub-regional parliaments. You would always have those issues and contestations. Now, if we're able to clear that and sort that out and, take ourselves away from, and not even get into this hysteria, I've seen, you read social media and you would want to weep. You would, especially some of the very xenophobic comments in social media about this issue. Some people even going to the extent of saying this displays the fact that Malema or South Africa has to teach the rest of Africa politics, which is nonsensical. We because politicians are fighting does not necessarily mean that people who have come to that parliament do not know anything about democracy and things like that. So if we are able to understand this and get ourselves out of this hysterical mood and say, what is the solution? We need to start asking ourselves, what is the solution? This continent, this is the only continent we have. And the reason why we have created the African Union is to be able to move this continent forward politically and economically. Is it doing that? Of course, there are lots of problems. I mean, I've spent the last, 14 years criticizing the African Union in my work, but criticizing in the point where one also provides solutions to the issues. So I think the first thing, maybe there's also a good thing, right? That now everybody knows about Pan-African Parliament, because the problem is that not many people know about the existence of this parliament. Not many people know about the existence of the African Union on the continent. Not many people also know about some of the issues that we've been engaging in, or the African Union has been engaging in terms of regionalism. So at least maybe this is blessing in disguise, that at least we know, right? Now that we know, what do we do with information? What we do with information is not to engage in issues of let's close it, it's no longer in existence, And as a matter of fact, maybe what we should actually be angry about is not so much that, because I've also listened to some commentariats saying South Africa is spending money on Pan-African Parliament. South Africa is wasting money on Pan-African Parliament as an host nation. That is what happens in international law. If you are going to host, you would have to fund it. Ghana is hosting the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And one of the conditions was that Ghana has to build a secretariat, and Ghana built it for $12 million. So look, if you host, you pay. It's simple principle in international law. So maybe we should get that clear. Then number two, South Africa is also not the only country funding the Pan-African Parliament. In fact, our anger should be that most of the funding for Pan-African Parliament comes from external donors. The World Bank funds it, the European Union funds it, UNDP funds it, right? So maybe we should actually be asking ourselves to say, how do we begin to shift our understanding? How do we begin to take ownership of our processes. Another reporter had asked me that is the Pan-African Parliament legitimate? I said, look, even on the issue of legitimacy, we also have to understand legitimacy in thresholds. We are not going to say it has zero legitimacy. Yes, it has significantly diminished legitimacy. So the reason why I've gone into all of this discussion is to say that how do we move forward? How do we create issues of moving forward? And I would just run through some of my, some of the issues that I've, discussed about in my research over the years on how to salvage the Pan-African Parliament. And of course, then I will be open for discussions. Number one, there's a protocol that is yet to become law. The amendment of the Pan-African Parliament. I am a big critic of that protocol. I think that protocol is very patronizing. I think it does not address what we want. So the protocol, for example, does not give the Pan-African Parliament the powers to make binding laws. It has to make binding laws. You cannot have a legislation where people just come there to talk and not make laws. You might as well call it a seminar, right? So that protocol does not give the Pan-African Parliament powers to make laws. It says it can make draft model laws. I mean, we all know draft model law is very, you recommend to member states. So you say, oh, South Africa, we think you should do this, and South Africa will say, do we want to do it? No, and there will be no consequences for saying no to that. So we need that kind of shift. Now, another innovation or another good thing about that protocol is that it says member states can now start experimenting with direct elections of members to the Pan-African Parliament. Now, if members are directly elected and they can't make laws, again, you begin to see the disconnection there, right? So we directly elect people from Lesotho, from Eswatini, but the thing is that they come to Midrand and they can't make laws. You see, it also defeats the purpose. So what we need to start doing is to understand that, first and foremost, as I know, as hard and as as difficult as this sounds, is that the AU is made up of 55 member states. It's the largest regional organization in the world. There's no regional organization that is as large as the AU. And member states come with different dynamics. Africa is not a country after all. So people come with different political, agenda, economic, cultural as well, right? So we understand that. So because they come to that table with different dynamics, some even come with the Lusophone, Francophone, Anglophone, and all this, artificial things we divide, we allow to divide us. They will not always agree on how to move ahead, which is not a bad thing. Even in a home of 3 siblings, not all will agree on certain things, right? So that is that. Then what we need to start doing is to engage in some sort of flexibility. Flexibility in the sense that there are certain countries, and you cannot tell me that there are no 5 countries out of these 55 that are willing to allow Pan-African Parliament to exercise rural powers. Of course, there'll be 5. There'll be, at the most, don't let me say 10, but let's say there are 5 countries, right? These 5 countries can come together and agree, sign an agreement with the Pan-African Parliament and say, we would allow you to legislate on certain areas. And I think Sediko had read out some of the objectives of the Pan-African Parliament. So issues of human rights, issues of, elections, issues of democracy and governance and things like that. We allow you to legislate. In fact, we would even allow direct election of members, right? You start from that perspective and with the good practices. And when others see it, of course, there will be lots of mistakes. There will be lots of stumbles, right? When others see it, then others can now say, okay, maybe we should join. that group, right? Or others see it and be like, no, they're not going to join. You see, the issue with the Pan-African Parliament, someone had asked me that why are African leaders scared to grant it powers? I mean, they've been promising to grant it powers since 2009. The idea was that 2009, they would review, and they've not had that meeting. What they've given us is a patronizing kind of, patronizing protocol. And you're saying, why would they not? Of course, they understand perfectly, especially African governments that are very dictatorial and tyrannical. They understand the impact of granting these powers to a parliamentarian, and they even understand. Now, think of this. If you have, I mean, what Malema has done actually has shown that you could have a Pan-African parliament where you would have radical elements, perhaps people who do not, because of the political dynamics of their countries, are not able to make that kind of impact or are not able to make that noise in their country, could be elected to the Pan-African Parliament. And once they are elected to the Pan-African Parliament, they can form coalitions. And once they form coalitions, they can make laws. Once they can make laws, they can make things unbearable for presidents and for dictatorial regimes. So you can begin to see how this becomes very, why dictatorial regimes would not want to touch this with a long pole. Another problem is this. We're asking ourselves, I mean, with the Malabo Protocol, one good thing about the Malabo Protocol is also that when you send 5 people to the African Parliament, at least half must be women. I mean, at least 2 must be women, right? So that you have gender balance. The next question you'll ask yourself is this: if we allow for direct elections and women don't get elected to the parliament, how do you balance that? That again is one factor we have to look at to say that based on the African Union policies and based on the African Union Agenda 2063, as a matter of fact, that says by 2023, all governmental platforms on this continent must be gender balanced, 50-50. The African Union Commission has done that already with the last elections in June. The African Court of Justice, African Court of Human and People's Rights. I mean, you know, when people say bad things about the African Union and say, oh, the African Union is such a failure, there are good things that we could actually look at. The African Court of Human and People's Rights is the only regional court in the world that has more women than men. It has 60% female representation. Not even the European Court of Human Rights has that. Not even the International Court of Justice has that. So, you know, these are some of the good practices. And we say, even if there are going to be elections, it is incumbent on parties to ensure that women are given the platform. Or even if women don't get elected, there must be special seats in the parliament to ensure that no matter what happens, we still have a parliament that is composed of at least 50% women on the continent. It's very important. And of course, also in that configuration, we also have to look at youth representation. We know our continent is the youngest continent, but the irony of it all is that the average age of our leaders is over 60. So this is a continent of which over 70% are young people, or, you know, thereabout, are young people, but they are being led by by old men who cling to power and who are not willing in any way to leave power. So you know, this is also part of I think the last thing I will say before we open the floor is we need to begin to, you know, to think outside of the box. We need to stop being too pessimistic and stop being too despondent and, you know, trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There will be conflict, there will be contestations. And this is not to say that we encourage the violence. Of course, we do not encourage the violence that happened. This is not to say that people should be unruly, should be unruly about things. Of course, they shouldn't be like that. But when we have these kinds of contestations, it's also symptomatic of something. And those are the things that we need to start looking at. There's a Yoruba proverb that captures this. It says, you see me placing something on my head. I place something on my head and it's slanted. It's not placed properly, and you're telling me to place it properly instead of you telling me to place that thing in a direct way. Why don't you look at my feet to see how I'm even standing? Perhaps my posture is the reason why my head is slanted. So essentially, what this means is that when we are critiquing, when we are looking at some of these things, we need to look at the root cause of many of our problems, or of some of our problems, and we need to start thinking about it. We have no other continent but this, and we need not also engage in this kind of pessimistic and very dangerous way of looking at things. We need to find solutions. We need to think of solutions, and of course, not all solutions will work. Solutions will fail. Some would, but it allows us to refine our processes and to be better. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Prof. You have highlighted that the Pan-African Parliament is a parliament with no lawmaking powers, no legislative powers, and no mandate. There is a protocol that has not yet been signed, and even that protocol does not give the Pan-African Parliament the legislative powers. You have argued that we should not be pessimistic. We should not, just by seeing incidents that happen at Midrand, and just now be alarmist and say, no, let's close this down. Pan-African Parliament is not working. Those incidents happen all over the world. It happens in many parliaments across the world. Therefore, we should not use one incident, even if there were many incidents, and come to a conclusion that we should close down the Pan-African Parliament. We say it's a very good platform that can be used to achieve the objectives of Pan-African Parliament, the founding objectives of Pan-African Parliament. If it's used objectively, it can achieve all its aims and goals. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time. Before we can take questions, let me indicate to our participant that the next speaker was supposed to be Professor Hanyane. Unfortunately, he has got a family bereavement. Deepest condolences to Prof. Hanyane. He has indicated that he won't be participating, and we send our deepest condolences to Prof. Hanyane and his family. He's a member of this platform, and we'll see him soon. Deepest condolences to you, Prof. Hanyane. Thank you so much, Prof. We'll allow questions, comment, inputs from the floor. And we go to Mr. Komani. Your hand is up. You are the first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Prof, the first thing that I want to be unequivocal about is your statement that I disagree vehemently with it, to say, if you look at African countries, most of the leaders, the average age is 60. Age has got no problem. It has to do with competencies. If you're going to be taking into account age as a criteria, that is very exclusionary. Then others will come and say women should not be in leadership positions. Others will say Black people in South Africa should not be in power as well. So the point that I'm trying to make is that there are many isms. There is ageism, which I am accusing you of, because you are questioning the issue of age. It should not be a problem. It has to do with capability. That is something which because if you're going to take age into account, it opens can of worms on my myriad of issues, including race, including gender, physical disability, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, it's a very insightful presentation. And perhaps I would like to make an input by saying that, you see, the African question, what we have seen, the recent events during the session of the Pan-Africanist Parliament is a tip of an iceberg. And in order to understand them, we need to be historical. We need to historicize. We need to take into account the historical state of affairs that led to that. You see, I always argue that Africans, and I'm including South Africa because it was subjected to colonialism of a special type, which was based on race. Africans were subjected to colonialism to such an extent that the model of government that they know is the one that is based on the principles of authoritarianism. That is why authoritarianism is antithetical to democracy. That is why you find that there in Africa in general, democratization is a challenge. Respect of social justice is a challenge. Promotion of human rights is a challenge. People want to be in power until thy kingdom come, which is a challenge. Because that is the model that they knew, because they were socialized into that. Remember colonialism. I want us to locate our debate within the post-colonial theory, the theory which accounts for the impact of the effects of colonialism in wide range of domains, in politics, in economy, social linguistic. And I'm mentioning social linguistic precisely because what came out of the debates emanating from the recent developments within this is the fact that the people are divided according to linguistics, along linguistic lines. We have got Lusophone countries, and then we've got Francophones, we have got also Anglophone, and so on and so forth. This is a clear indication that these Africans were socialized differently, but they were socialized to say to them, they need to carry the narrative, which has to do with the master, the colonial master. If it is Cameroon, it's likely to be France. If it is South Africa, it's likely to be Britain and white people, for example. Remember colonialism, you need to understand its psychological dimension. The fact that Africans, they were not only dispossessed of their land, right? They were taught that they are inferior. So remember, colonialism is total, taking control of a person's affective, that is emotions, behavioral, what you do, and as well as cognitive, what you are thinking. So it has to be understood within that particular context if we are going to be dealing with all these issues. Otherwise, if we are not going to locate this problem with its proper historical, social, and political context, then we are going to miss the point. Should we disband the parliament? No, there are challenges, but those particular challenges, when in the process of addressing them, we need to deconstruct the colonial mentality. That is what we need to do. People need to know that they're not here to represent the master. They are here to represent Africans. Hence, we are talking about Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is an ideology which counteracts colonialism and imperialism in all its forms, in manifest and its latent effects. Precisely because we should not assume that just because most African countries, we are now free, we are free countries, we are not colonized anymore, therefore it is gone. That is a simplistic assumption if we were to take that particular route. So basically that is my input as far as this debate is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Komani. Any other input, comments before I hand over to Prof? Any other inputs, comments, questions before I hand over to Prof? I don't see any hand. Any other inputs, comments before I hand over to Prof? Let me go to the social media platform. It looks like, Prof, what you have presented, people understand it, and they don't have any further questions. But let me go to a social media platform and check if there are some questions there. Colleagues, feel free to make comments, inputs on the Pan-African Parliament. Your views, your comments regarding today's topic. Over to you, Prof, on what was said by Komani. Then we can take other hands.
Oh yeah. Number one, I don't think I'm being ageist. The context in which I made that statement, which he had again agreed with at some point, and that some leaders want to stay in power and they don't want to leave. And we all know that most of the leaders we have, at least we can begin counting here. From Cameroon to Equatorial Guinea to Uganda to Congo now. These are leaders who are getting into their 70s, and some are even changing their age, and things like that, and they don't want to leave powers. The context in which I've made that statement is that many of our countries do not create enabling environment for young people to thrive in politics. So the same argument, the same ageist argument is what they also use to prevent young people from getting into politics. And the African Union actually has a law around this, the African Youth Protocol, the AYC, African Youth Convention, or protocol on young people on this continent, to say that African members should give space to young people to participate in politics. Enabling environment, political parties should also allow such to happen. So I think it's very important that we do that. The reason why we all know that the reason why we don't find young people in politics on this continent, issues that actually, created by those in politics who do not want to leave, right? And will not allow young people to get to that position. But that is that. And of course, I agree with historicizing the issue of Pan-African Parliament. It's very important that we place it in its historical context. Obviously, I think it's we need to, and even when we place it in its historical context, when we ask serious questions about why we're here. One of the critics or criticisms rather of the African Union is that it's a copy and paste of the European Union process. How we have copied those institutions and created them without context and all of those things. Perhaps one of the things we also need to start looking at is, when we are thinking of empowering the Pan-African Parliament, we need to also situate it within a socio-cultural, socio-political, socio-economic context, and to say, is it serving its purpose? Is it fit for purpose? Fit for the purpose of Africans, or achieving the expected mandate? It's quite important that we do that. I always tell people that if we measure regionalism by the number of documents, by the number of norms, by the number of policy documents we have, the African Union would actually be the best organization in the world. There's hardly anything it does not have documents on, from African youth, participation of youth, women, from, even to issues of culture and all of those things. But it is ironical that those things do not also come to the fore in terms of the practices of the African Union. It's quite the issue has to be placed in that proper context, and I think we can agree that the problems are immense, but they are not problems that we cannot counteract. I think it's important that we do that. Oh, I see someone. I see Bongani.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. Bongani, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Hope I'm audible.
Audible, Bongani.
Great, thanks, Sediko. Prof, thanks, man. Thanks for the insightful background and what was the rationale behind the Pan-African Parliament. Well, one thing that I want to submit sincerely is the activities that happen at at Midrand, the Pan-African Parliament, have hammered the already frail Pan-Africanism as an ideology. It created immense damage that I have no idea how it can be sort of made the Pan-Africanism to recover. It made a Pan-Africanism a sincere joke, irrespective of the circumstances, irrespective of bureaucratic inheritance, whether one is Francophone or British colonial and so forth. They behave inhumane. Simple as that. The members of the Pan-African Parliament behave inhumane. They were kids that required some kind of a supervision under the ideology of Pan-Africanism. Because when you talk of Pan-African Parliament, it's difficult to separate the Pan-Africanism. That is what I want to submit. I follow your explanation in terms of the elections as to the rotation and direct election, etc. Honestly, to me, I have no issue. I wanted to believe that all organs of the African Union, they have some kind of statute that, irrespective of the magnitude of the mandate that they have, but they're supposed to be governed by some form of statute. We can't have an institution that will run elections out of facts received in the morning, confirming something from the African Union. Really, that's not acceptable. That body, that institution, Pan-African Parliament. I mean, even the four of us, or the 17 of us, when we get together, we set rules. You unmute, you mute before you speak. What kind of governance we are experiencing at the Pan-African Parliament, where they have no idea on how they elect each other. So be it rotation or no rotation, but they were supposed to be a firm understanding. There is nothing that stops them to agree on that, to have some kind of a statute that says this is a clause in our statute that governs our elections. I mean, if you go there, some of the organs within the African Union, I can quote one, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council of the African Union. I think it's got clause 5 there that deals with the elections. They cannot rely on some email, on some facts, on some WhatsApp, on how to run elections. It's just not on. So I have no issue with the rotation or no rotation. A rational approach should be in place. I don't think they've got limitations to do that. They're supposed to have a way on how do we elect ourselves so that we are accommodating. And they can improve that going forward. If ever it doesn't make representation of females, let's refine it so that it's accommodating. If it has to do with issues of age and so forth, I hear what Komane argue around age. Even age itself, Komane, you cannot be not rational about it. You can't have people in their 80s still remain, and we don't know who measures their competence. So we always have to be rational. Now, lastly, Sediko, before I get too long, I wanted to get to a point of understanding. Though I understand this Pan-African Parliament is more of an advisory. Remember, I'm of the view that yes, the Pan-African Parliament must continue, but I'm of the view that maybe it's time to break it completely and rework it. The idea is correct. To have a Pan-African Parliament is correct, but under the components that we have currently, it is not the right way. So I'm of the view that let's break that thing and let's rework it. I hear just deconstruct the colonial mind and so forth. I don't think there's anything to do so far with the colonial mind here. It's just people who are unable to behave. Let's leave. Let's not embrace the colonialists so much. It's just people whom we think are leaders. They are just unable to behave. These people didn't differ on ideological issues. These people didn't differ. They just differ on petty things, in my view, where I'm sitting. Now, I wanted to check as to if Pan-African Parliament is more of an advisory body, how do we bring in the African peer review mechanism? Because it looks like the issue that we are facing, that is very fundamentally a problem in Africa, is the autonomy of each African state. As a result, it looks like it becomes very difficult as to who intervene at what point. Meaning which that is the area, if we were to think of the African unity or African Union or United States of Africa, we need to see to it as to how do we uniformize, how do we bring it to uniformity, the way the governance amongst the African states come together, so that when that day comes where we have to get under one roof, we better equipped. So I was always of the view that the African peer review mechanism is one instrument. And I thought the African Parliament, the Pan-African Parliament, supposed to pave the way towards that direction. That is why I'm saying the behavior that they've demonstrated, they have hammered the Pan-Africanism in the African continent. And it has hammered the unity of the the United States of Africa. As then I'm saying maybe certain instruments in the form of the African peer review mechanism at the country level, so that when people get under one roof, they have a way or certain norms that they follow. I thank you very much, Prof. and Sediko.
Thank you, Bongani. From Mutapa on the chat says, greeting Black family. The Pan-African Parliament is Pan-African by name, not by function or even by form. The institution, as Date Fagbaio said, is a clone of the European Union. It is more an instrument of Euro-American hegemony rather than an institution designed to advance Pan-African agenda. Thank you, Vuisile. Over to Prof, before we take some last hands and we close.
Oh, okay. Yes. Look, where do I start? The APRM. So APRM is something is something I've worked on over the years. There's no way, we also have to situate APRM, right? The African Peer Review Mechanism within certain contexts. The context is that the APRM is also a voluntary platform. It is voluntary for many years. It remains voluntary, as a matter of fact. So not all African member states belong to it. And its decisions are not binding as well, just like the Pan-African Parliament. It's a good instrument. It's a good idea where you check member states to see whether they are doing what they're supposed to do in terms of governance and things like that. Also, it's not binding. So we cannot use an instrument that is not binding, or an instrument that it's and of itself a voluntary mechanism to change things. But in the last year or so, or last 2 years, there was a decision at the African Union level to actually grant some powers to the African peer review mechanisms in such a way that it's able to check whether member states are adhering to Agenda 2063 and Sustainable Development Goals. But again, implementation, all it can do, again, is to recommend, isn't it? And things like that. So, and that is why I still, I'm still of the view that one way of, getting out of this logjam, and I agree with what Intate Bongani had said about the idea, maybe unpacking, but unpacking in such a way that we can still, we still keep the structure, but we're saying, how do we begin to think outside of it? Because as I said earlier, if you think that 55 African member states are going to agree to give it powers, then you and I might as well sit down here and say that snow will fall in Lagos tomorrow morning. There will be heavy snow in Lagos. If we can, if we believe that there will be snow in Lagos, then obviously it's fine. Then of course 55 member states will all agree. But what we can start doing is experimenting with what I described earlier, the flexibility approach. Because with the flexibility approach, the good thing about it is that maybe some see it and some see the good practices in it, and would want to join. And if others say, look, if we give powers to the Pan-African Parliament to work, then it will be able to actually fulfill some of its functions, and we'll be able to showcase it and things like that. And I still think it's very important. So, you know, yes, I criticized the outgoing president, you know, based on allegations that came out 2-3 years ago, 2018 thereabout. I criticized them, you know, said perhaps the reason why many of these things happen is because there's no serious oversight over the Pan-African Parliament, and because there are no direct elections as well to the body and things like that. But even where you have direct elections, there will still be problems. But we're dealing with issues of accountability for people to know. For African states, I think it's quite, it's unfortunate, but maybe it's also a blessing in disguise that we had to encounter this fiasco of squabbling for people to now know. And I can say that I think now, of all the African Union agencies or institutions or organs, the Pan-African Parliament is the most popular for all the wrong reasons, right? But at least is the most popular right now as we speak. But it's also unfair to place all the blame on it, because we should rather be looking at, because the center of power at the African Union is the Assembly of Heads of States and Government. They are the ones who can make a decision tomorrow morning to grant it powers, but they've not done that, right? They are the ones who keep ensuring that this organization does not have powers. So while many people are criticizing the Pan-African Parliament, perhaps we should also move the beam light and place where blame is, right? And say, look, place blame where it should be placed, rather, and say, look, guys, you are the ones who are supposed to grant this organization powers. And we all know, I mean, we know the reasons why you're not granting it powers, right? And perhaps we should start thinking around those issues. Of course, you know, the question of the legitimacy of the institution is at stake, right? Not only the Pan-African Parliament. I don't think, I will not go to the extent of saying what Pan-African Parliament has done in the past 2 weeks has actually damaged Pan-Africanism to the point where, if we are going to be saying that, we might as well, you know, of course, the AU Assembly is there as well. And you have many presidents misbehaving, many presidents not even taking the decisions of the African Union seriously. So they also are damaging. So there are many areas in which people are chipping or taking away from Pan-African Parliament. But the thing is, I'm sorry, taking away from Pan-Africanism. But the thing is that we should look back in order to think forward. And I think this opportunity, this is blessing in disguise, as I keep saying. It has given us an opportunity to look back and be able to think forward and think of more strategic goals or strategic ways of financing the power. I think, let me say this, there's something I saw today that actually depressed me about the African Union in general, that there was the African Center for Disease Control, which is actually, of all the institutions of the African Union as we speak now, the CDC is actually the shining example, you know, in terms of, you know, some of the guidelines and some of the ways they've handled the pandemic at the continental level. The headquarters is being built by China, you know, and the question is it so bad that African countries cannot build it themselves? And we keep seeing all of these things, this whole idea of relying on external donors. You know, the African Peace and Security Council Secretariat headquarters was also built by Germany. The African Union Secretariat was built by China. So you see these tendencies of relying excessively on external funders or external donors. So some of these things, I mean, even when we discuss the Pan-African Parliament, we should also place it in this holistic, kind of a much broader perspective of issues. So it's very important that we look at that. We take control, we take ownership of our processes, and stop relying on donors, as Thomas Sankara beautifully put it in the 80s. He says, "He who feeds you controls you." So, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Let's take the last round. There is a question from Saheli Chataraj. He says the members of the Pan-African Parliament are selected by the national parliament of the respective countries and not elected. Do you consider this a challenge to the democratic nature and functioning of the Pan-African Parliament? Komane says context matters. If we don't take into account the historical and political context, then how are we going to disabuse individuals from members, states, nations of the colonial thinking, pushing the narrative of the master, which is essentially imperialist in nature? Pan-Africanism is an ideology critique of colonialism, being a historical renders the African Union and an African dream unnecessary. Before you respond, let me take again Bongani, then you will close, Prof. Bongani?
Thanks, Sediko. Prof. Sense. Prof, I want us to be, let's not brush around. The building in Midra, it's a good initiative for the Pan-African Parliament. That's where my position. These people, they get out of that building and they discuss, irrespective of whether the head of state has given power or not, but they have some kind of work that they have to do. Be it the sort of advisory to existing parliaments or country parliaments and so forth. They have some kind of work. That is a good initiative towards the envisioned African Union. We appreciate that. We really were pleased. Yes, we understand, like you suggest, you probably, let's have 5 countries agree and so forth on a concrete mandate. So in the absence of such a mandate, these guys, they meet, they discuss, they have sessions, they elect themselves and so forth, and in whatever form they form. It is a good initiative. It's a point to get going. I think that parliament isn't that long. So they're doing fairly well. So we expected them to progress them step by step. Be it 5 countries agree, be it over time, the Pan-African Parliament, it becomes a real parliament with some kind of where they pass laws and so forth. That is appreciated. But what we cannot appreciate is to see key fighting. Honestly, if you ask anyone, what is it that they're fighting about? They just couldn't talk to each other. Simple as that. Can you blame colonialism on that? Can you blame foreign donors on that? Really? These people, simple. The other one says, let's elect people based on rotation. And the other one says, no, let's elect that. There is no ideological difference. Nothing. It's just a matter of contesting the positions that they could have sit among themselves. How best can we do this? That's what we expect of leaders from parliament. If somebody said they are selected, leaders that have been selected from their parliament, they should be able to sit down and say, no, you see this thing, it doesn't work, let's find it. They should be able to find each other. They should be able to understand each other's cultural backgrounds and so forth. That's what we expect. Is there intervention of donors on that? Is there a colonialist that has been in that room that made people to stand up instead when they talk, they stand up, they walk, they want to handle each other? Let's be frank, as African people, that's not the kind of leadership that we expect from that level of hegemony of the continent. Simple as that, these people are misbehaving. Simple. These people are far from being leaders. If that's what we demonstrate of African leaders, it is those people. No, I'm afraid we will fail. That is the behavior that we are having a problem with. That's why I'm saying it hammers the ideology. I mean, for Africa to unite, somehow, we need to have a formidable ideology, a formidable religion that will drive us together to have something that we common about. So, to a great extent, we have a Pan-Africanism. Now, if you have a Pan-Africanism associated now with hooligans who are sitting in the Pan-African Parliament of the African continent, hooligans, and we brush those things. I'm sorry, I cannot. A Pan-African Parliament that is supposed to, even if it plays a role of advisory, it should play the role of advisory. There's so many things that they should do. The Sustainable Development Goals were not achieving much. Illicit financial flows in this continent are extremely high. Those are the things that they should, even if they don't have a full mandate, they should be dealing with those things. How do we achieve the Agenda 2063, as you are mentioning? How do we deal with issues of infrastructure? Even if they are trying, they have a lot to talk about. They go and they stand up, they hold each other, they fight physically. And in this space, like in an academic space like this, we brush those things, we complain about foreign donors. No, it's not. Hooligans. It's hooligans who couldn't behave. After all, they have such a huge mandate, irrespective even if it's not signed, but they've got a lot to do. Prof, I'm very sorry. That what we saw there, it was just embarrassing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bongani. Komani, you are the last, then Prof, you'll do the closing. Komani, in short.
Yeah, this one, I want to disagree with the latter speaker. You see, he is looking at individual behavior and giving it a microscopic analysis. And I am saying context matters because I want to give it a macroscopic analysis. In other words, you need to understand the social forces, locate all this behavior within the social forces. And there is ideological difference. Remember, these countries were colonized by different European countries with different ideologies. Colonization simply means transmission of certain values on how to do things, when to do things, and so forth. So there is it is a mistake to assume that all people that are sitting in that parliament want a Pan-Africanist dream. They share the same one. They are not. There are others who are simply there just to loot the parliament, the institution of money, nothing else, nothing more. So if you're going to be homogenizing and thinking that they stand with one voice, then that is a problem. Even if they were not colonized by one master. Remember, they come from different backgrounds, politically, socially, and so on and so forth. And then that is why I'm saying a unifying ideology would start with how we think. What is it? How we think. Remember, and how we think has to start with the problem that we want to address. The problems that African countries want to address through African Union. They don't start yesterday. You need to trace back the history of Africa. That is when you need to trace the history of colonialism, which is still here. Funding, for example, if World Bank is funding Pan-Africanist parliament, if you are not critical and think that they're just on a philanthropic mission, then you are mistaken precisely because it come up with what is called conditionalities. For example, the Bretton Woods institutions, your World Bank, your IMF, whenever they're funding countries from Africa or anywhere else, they come up with conditionalities because they want to maintain that inferiority superiority relationship between the West and the South, the North and the South. So I cannot imagine anyone who can come and say to us, we should forget about what apartheid did to Black people and not locate the behavior of Black people in South Africa when they are behaving a certain way in that particular context. Otherwise, it becomes a conservative view. You need to be very critical and look at other issues that are informing that particular behavior. So if this applies to those guys who are in those countries, is there any country which is democratic in Africa? I only hear about opposition leaders being subjected to all this draconian treatment by those who are in power. I hear about coup d'etats. There may be a few countries who are democratic in a sense, but generally, or broadly speaking, African countries are not in any way democratic. And I'm not blaming them. I'm saying they don't know any model of government other than the one that was transposed to them by their colonial master. So if you're going to forget about the mind, remember the psychological dimension of colonialism. You need to start from the mind. Everything must start from the mind. If you're not going to touch the mind, and I am telling you, we are going to be sitting here discussing the very same problem because you are ignoring the mind. the psychology of colonialism. That is what I call it. Because people have internalized this narrative about the colonizer. So if you are not going to disabuse them, any program that has to do with, if you're not disabusing Africans, all the leaders, everybody, irrespective. So you may be surprised how they are still listening to the master. They are host of oppressors. They are host of colonizers, so to speak. Let me stop there.
Thank you so much, Prof. In closing, you're on mute.
I was
Prof,
speaking. I didn't know that I had muted myself. Yeah, but yeah, I think, look, it's very important that we. Maybe I should start with Saheli's question about direct elections and things like being democratic and all of those things. Maybe the question is not so much about it being democratic as it is the legitimacy of it all, because the argument of the African Union is that at least the people we sent to the Pan-African Parliament were directly elected at the national level. So they come with some sort of legitimacy as well. But when we say there should be direct election to the parliament, then we are saying that those who will be directly elected would not, because as it is, many of the MPs at the Pan-African Parliament owe their allegiance to national government and to their parties and all of those things. But if there's a direct election, then of course we would have some sort of, people would perhaps be more accountable to the people who have elected them to the Pan-African Parliament. And perhaps it would also help conscientize our people, right? Because when people vote, when you campaign, then people will be like, okay, yeah, so what's this Pan-African Parliament about? Why are we sending you there and things like that? So I think that's the concern regarding that. And what for the comments, it's, look, no one is excusing parliamentarians or for the fracas. I mean, no one is excusing them for that, from being censured. I mean, that was a very disgraceful act, but that does also not mean that we should not also speak about these issues of saying, and when we talk about issues of financing, when we talk about issues of Eurocentric, to decolonize the system, this is not a justification of anything. It's not that we're justifying bad behavior. We're just saying, while we're doing all of these things, while we're being introspective, we also know that we have other problems that we need to deal with. So it's one thing for us to deal with those issues. It's another thing to also, because there are these are internal and external problems that we also need to take into account in the way in which, the entire process of reforming the African Union. And of course, there's a reform process. There's an ongoing reform process now that has been inspired by Agenda 2063, of which things are being done. But unfortunately, this reform process, I've written about it somewhere, that this reform process focuses too heavily on technocratic efficiency, on African Union Commission and things like that. It says nothing. It's not really saying anything about Pan-African Parliament, which is quite unfortunate. So the same attention that has been directed to other organs of the AU, in particular the African Union Commission, has not been directed to the Pan-African Parliament in terms of reforming its processes. So I think it's very important that we also take that into account. And this kind of platform is also a very good one, which allows us to also, because we cannot all have the same ideology, even in the way we talk about Pan-Africanism. We'll come to Pan-Africanism with different ideologies. I mean, Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah came to Pan-Africanism with different ideologies, right? Muammar Gaddafi, Olusegun Obasanjo, Thabo Mbeki also came to Pan-Africanism with different ideologies, but we have common purpose that we need to achieve. And as long as we don't lose sight of that common purpose, no one road leads to the market. There are different roads that will lead to the market. So if we understand that, then of course respect our views, and we bring all the ideas to the table, and appreciate the diversity of our continent, and then push, and the need to make our continent great, and need to also allow for allow for people to flourish, and to deal with many of these issues. And I think I agree with what Ntate Bongani is saying about, there are many issues that we need to deal with now, that we cannot afford to just sit down and, and allow parliamentarians to just start running amok. Of course, many of our people are dying, trying to cross to Europe, dying in the Mediterranean. I was reading a report this morning that millions, tens of millions of our people, due to COVID-19, Africans, have been pushed into poverty, which is likely going to increase. I saw the figure somewhere, I can't remember now, but it's an alarming figure of, and how do we begin to deal with all of those things? But those things are very crucial, and these points are very crucial. I think I would really, and I've learned from the questions, and I appreciate, of course, we will not all agree on the same points. I've appreciated the diversity of opinion and ideological purviews on these issues, and these are some of the things that would also go into my research going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Africa is the only continent we have as Africans. And it is upon us as Africans to ensure that we build up this continent for our generations to come. Because if we destroy it, our generations to come will have no continent to inherit. Colleagues, when we started, we've indicated that the objectives of the Pan-African Parliament are to implement the policies and objectives of the African Union, cultivate human rights and democracy in Africa, make sure the member states adhere to good governance, transparency, and accountability. Let the people of Africa know what the objectives and policies of the African Union are, so that they might be able to integrate themselves continentally while still working within the framework of the AU. Promote peace, security, and stability of the continent. Promote self-reliance and economic recovery so as to lead to a more prosperous future for the people of Africa. Promote cooperation and development in Africa. Strengthen a sense of solidarity and build common destiny among the people of Africa. Create cooperation among regional economic communities and their members in parliament. This is the only continent we have as Africans, and it's up to us to ensure that Africa prospers. It's up to us to ensure that we engage on these kind of topics with an aim of building a better Africa for all of us. Thank you so much, colleagues, for participating. Thank you so much, Prof, for availing yourself to present. Thank you so much, colleagues who have participated through the social media network. The Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute will continue having this type of dialogues, and you'll be invited to come and engage with us. Our aim is to provide a platform where society can engage on issues and find a solution on the challenges that are facing society. Thank you so much, and have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.